When I tell people that I'm a bike lawyer, they don't really know what to think. Is that a thing, right? I don't think you can be a bike lawyer and be viable except in a place like New York City, where the traffic's so dense and there's so many cyclists. So this is the right place for me to do it. In fact, there's a number of bike lawyers who do that work here in New York City. But how I got here is a little bit more complicated, but it's a story that I enjoy telling. There's been a few chapters for me, but I've always been a New Yorker who biked. And that meant getting to high school by bike and going around visiting friends by bike in New York City, racing buses, what I liked to do when I was a teenager. But really, I was most interested in politics, left politics. I was deeply involved with Democratic Socialists of America. I was a campaign field manager for Ruth Messinger, who was one of the leading DSA elected officials in the entire country. I was on their National Executive Council back in the 80s, very active with them in college. And when I got out of college, I began doing social justice work with unions because I had come from a union family. My parents were both musicians, and I worked sometimes professionally as a musician myself. They didn't really want me to be a musician because I was good at school, so I didn't get quite the support with my musical career that my sister got. She went into the music business. I went to college, and then afterwards, not to be thwarted by my parents' designs, I went straight to work for the Musicians Union, which I did for a number of years. Worked for a few other unions, doing labor organizing, community organizing here in New York City, and then eventually decided to go to law school out at Rutgers in Newark. And the plan initially was to be a labor lawyer, but ultimately that didn't work out quite the way I had hoped. So I took a little right turn and went to work for what they call big law nowadays, a white shoe corporate law firm called Debevoise in Plimpton. It attracted me for a few reasons, but one of the main ones is that they had a great reputation for funding all kinds of different pro bono projects. And in the 14 years that I spent at Debevoise as a corporate litigator, I worked on a number of cases that interestingly kind of ended up playing into what I do now as a bike lawyer. One of them was doing advocacy work on behalf of people with mental illness, and I had a major engagement trying to get the Metropolitan Transportation Authority to open up their program for people with disabilities to people who had mental illness as a disability. Because they were giving half-fare Metro cards to people who suffer from mental retardation and had symptoms that were quite similar to people with mental illness, but mental illness and the subway, it just didn't mix in the minds of the MTA. So that group did not get the half-fare. It was great to win after many years' struggle and repeal that exclusion of people with mental illness from the group that would receive that half-fare card, because it's a tremendous stigma associated with mental illness, and you overcome the stigma by getting people out of their isolation, out of their homes, and into transportation. So the idea was bridging, and opening up the public realm to people who might get shut out of it otherwise, and what government can do to try to open up the public realm so that we can all come into our own in it, so to speak. When it was time for me to leave Debevoise, it made sense for me to take the skills that I had learned, primarily doing tort defense work on behalf of corporations, frankly, that had harmed large numbers of people in what are called mass torts, and then apply that to what I've come to see as really the biggest mass tort ever, perhaps next to, there have been some big ones. Cigarettes, alcohol, but private motoring, in my mind, is also a mass tort. And what's interesting to me is that it's never received a mass tort treatment. And what is fundamental and characteristic of a mass tort is that it's a pattern, right? There are people who are getting hurt over and over and over again in the same way. So when there's a dangerous product that causes that, when there's a toxic substance like asbestos or a pharmaceutical that may yield some benefit but also harm a lot of people, well, those are mass torts, right? And I was doing that defense work for 14 years at Debevoise and honing my skills as a lawyer. But around me, as I would bike into work every day, I saw that there were patterns of people getting hurt out in our public space on the streets by drivers. But with the car blindness that we have in our culture, everyone looks at those traffic interactions not as a pattern, but as a one-off encounter between, individuals, as if no one knows what's going to happen, when a bunch of pedestrians in a dense, crowded urban environment like New York City are told to crowd into the subways and crowd onto the margins into tiny little strips of sidewalk while the lion's share of public space has been given to drivers. Well, of course we know what's going to happen. We're going to have hundreds of people killed every year in New York City, 40,000 plus killed every year nationally, and God knows how many in the world. I don't have those stats at my fingertips. It's obvious. Drivers in their giant cars in the city are like bulls in china shops, and allowing drivers the way we do to take over all of that public space in again, a dense, crowded, urban environment full of pedestrians. We know what's going to happen. You're going to break some china. You're going to hurt some people, and you're going to kill some people. That's a mass tort because you know it's going to happen. So for me, taking those skills that I learned as an organizer, dealing with people, which I love, I just love politics and meeting and interacting with people, and helping them and understanding what motivates them and what concepts of justice motivate them. And then taking my knowledge of mass torts and applying it to an area where, as far as I'm concerned, when I step out of my home in the morning, when I step out of my office in the evening, I'm seeing this mass tort unfolding or almost unfolding every minute of every day, the way people are interacting in traffic. And to say that people don't understand this, people don't get that there is this broader issue of justice that needs to be fought in order to make our public realm safe, convenient, economically vibrant. Of course there's a need for that, and that's why I'm a bike lawyer. It really flows quite naturally, I think, from those earlier chapters. I love my job, and I love my clients. They're really interesting people who decide to ride a bike for transportation in New York City. I also represent pedestrians, but mainly it's because they get hurt and they speak to their friends, the cyclists, and they say, give this guy Steve a call. People don't identify as pedestrians when they're struck in the same way, and they don't go about finding a lawyer in the same way. But people who are cyclists identify as cyclists. They have an understanding that's almost sort of a secret understanding of how the city works, how our public realm works, and how you can just sort of slip seamlessly with this amazing machine, the bicycle, and just do an urban transportation hack. You don't have to deal with the car insurance or the car parking or the car repairs or the car gas, the car tickets, any of that nonsense. You just opt right out of it. You don't have to deal with people coughing and sneezing on you on the subway, which was an issue and a problem before COVID. You can just go your own way. You wait on very, very few lines, if any, as a cyclist. Most cyclists should probably wait online a little bit more than they do. There's some line cutting behavior we need to discourage in our cycling community. But it's this magical thing that opens up the city for you. And then once you get hit, all of a sudden you're just enmeshed in these bureaucracies. There's the police come, and that's one bureaucracy. You have to deal with a medical bureaucracy in the ER where you're sitting and waiting. You have to deal with the insurance company bureaucracy. And then people are saying, oh, well, you should go talk to a lawyer. And you say, oh, legal bureaucracy. You don't want any part of that. That's why you opted out of all of that by using a bike for transportation. So being a guide for people through that maze, the mazes and bureaucracies that you're confronted with when you become a crash victim, is something I find genuinely satisfying. And I've done it now for hundreds of people, and I hope I'll have the chance to do it for thousands more.